September 12th, 1941. A fog-shrouded pier in Ostend, Belgium. The North Sea wind whipped salt spray across the weathered wooden planks, carrying the faint, acrid tang of diesel from idling fishing boats, masquerading as something far more sinister. You could almost taste the brine on your lips, feel the chill seep through your woolen coat as if the sea itself were breathing down your neck. In the dim glow of a single lantern, swinging from a rusted post, a figure huddled against the pilings. Tall, gaunt, with the sharp features of a man who'd seen too many shadows. His name was Johann Keller, a wiry Abwehr operative posing as a Flemish fisherman, his calloused hands betraying years of hauling nets rather than secrets. Keller glanced at his watch, the luminescent dial flickering like a ghost in the mist. 2:17 a.m. The rendezvous was late, but that was the game, patience in the face of the unpredictable. He adjusted the brim of his battered cap, pulling it low over eyes that darted to every creak of the pier, every lap of waves against the barnacle-crusted supports. In his pocket, a sealed envelope burned like contraband, codes for a new radio transmitter, frequencies to link him with the sleeper network in England. Operation Trout, they called it back in Berlin, slipping agents across the channel to burrow into the British heartland, feeding intelligence on troop movements, factory outputs, the pulse of the war machine. Keller had run dozens of insertions, but this one felt heavier, the fog thicker than usual, as if the night itself conspired against him. A low rumble cut through the haze, not thunder, but the muffled throb of a submarine's diesels. E-boat, more like, sleek, deadly, slipping from the harbour like a predator from its lair. It nosed into view, its silhouette blacker than the water, crewed by silent shadows in oilskins. Keller signalled with a flashlight, 3 short bursts, then 2 long, and a rope ladder uncoiled over the side. He gripped the slick hemp, hauling himself aboard with the ease of a man who'd done this dance before. The deck lurched underfoot as the boat pulled away, engines growling to life, slicing through the fog toward the open sea. Below decks, in the cramped cabin reeking of wet wool and machine oil, Keller met his contact, Hauptmann Erich Voss, a stern-faced U-boat veteran with a scarred cheek from a RAF strafing run. Voss unfolded a chart on the narrow table, his nicotine-stained fingers tracing the route. "You'll hit the English coast near Margate by dawn," he said, voice a gravelly whisper over the hum of the props. "The trawler waits offshore. Your ticket in. Remember, Keller, the Führer's eyes are on this. One slip, and the network crumbles." Keller nodded, memorizing the drop points. A secluded cove, then a rendezvous with a local sympathizer in London. His cover was solid, a Dutch merchant fleeing the occupation, papers forged by the best in Hamburg. But as the E-boat plunged into the swells, the envelope in his pocket seemed to pulse with urgency. Inside were not just codes, but names. 5 agents already embedded, their wireless sets silent but ready. If he made it, Trout would swell the Abwehr's ears in Britain. If not, well, the Gestapo had ways of extracting loyalty from failures. Hours blurred into a monotonous churn of spray and darkness. You imagine the salt stinging your eyes, the boat's hull groaning against the waves, every shadow on the horizon a potential destroyer. Keller paced the deck, chain-smoking Gauloises to steady his nerves, when the first sign of trouble flickered. A distant beam sweeping the sea like a scythe. Searchlight from a patrol vessel. He ducked below, heart pounding, as Voss barked orders to cut engines. The E-boat drifted, silent as a submerged sub, while the light probed closer. It passed, a false alarm, but the tension lingered like gunpowder smoke. By 5:45 a.m., the English coast loomed, a jagged line of cliffs veiled in pre-dawn grey. The trawler appeared on cue, its running lights dimmed, a burly Englishman at the rail waving them in. Keller transferred with his gear, a suitcase radio disguised as a fishing tackle box, civilian clothes and that fateful envelope. As the E-boat vanished into the mist, he felt the weight of the island settle on him. England, vast and watchful, its people oblivious to the spies threading through their midst. The trawler chugged toward Margate Harbour, the sun cracking the horizon in bloody streaks. Keller rehearsed his story, refugee from Rotterdam, seeking work in the factories. The skipper, a grizzled local named Hargrove with a pipe clenched in his teeth, eyed him suspiciously, but said nothing. Docking amid the bustle of early morning fishermen, Keller slipped ashore, blending into the crowd of porters and fishmongers. The air smelled of fresh-caught cod and coal smoke from the town's chimneys, a far cry from the sterile halls of Berlin. He made for the railway station, buying a ticket to London with crumpled Reichsmarks exchanged for pounds. The platform teemed with commuters, office clerks in trilbies, women in headscarves clutching ration books. Keller boarded a third-class carriage, settling by the window as the train rattled south. Fields whipped by, green and deceptively peaceful, dotted with anti-aircraft batteries and barrage balloons like silverfish in the sky. His mind raced ahead. Contact the first agent, codename Sparrow, in a Bloomsbury pub. Deliver the codes, activate the net. But as the train clattered into Victoria Station, something gnawed at him, a forgotten detail, a loose thread. He patted his pockets, then froze. The envelope. No, still there, safe, yet unease coiled in his gut like barbed wire. Unbeknownst to him, across the channel, British codebreakers at Bletchley Park had cracked a fragment of Abwehr traffic days earlier, whispers of trout floating through their decrypted dispatches. MI5's net was already spinning, invisible filaments waiting for the fly. Keller emerged into London's throng, the clamour of taxis and newsboys assaulting his senses. Big Ben tolled the hour, a sombre knell amid the sandbagged monuments. He hailed a cab, directing the driver to a nondescript boarding house in Camden. Inside, the landlady, a stout widow with suspicious eyes, handed him a key without a word. In his cramped room, smelling of damp plaster and boiled cabbage, he unpacked the radio, tuning it carefully to the emergency frequency. That night, as blackout curtains smothered the city and ARP wardens patrolled the streets, Keller transmitted his first signal. Trout arrived, awaiting Sparrow. The dots and dashes whispered into the ether, bouncing off the ionosphere toward Belgium. He leaned back, exhaling smoke from his last cigarette, believing himself a ghost in the machine. But in a dimly lit office at MI5 headquarters on Curzon Street, a young analyst named Felicity Hart sifted through intercepted bursts. Her fingers flew over a typewriter, decoding the faint trace. "Trout," she murmured to her superior, Captain Geoffrey Lang. "It's active. Margate insertion, Camden safe house." Lang's eyes narrowed, the map on the wall pinning the coordinates like a butterfly. "Double-check the cutout. If this is the breach we've been waiting for." The trap was set, jaws hidden in the fog of war. Keller slept soundly that night, dreaming of victories yet to come, oblivious to the shadows closing in. The network he'd come to nurture was already fraying at the edges, one accidental slip away from unraveling entirely. October 14th, 1941. A cramped pub in Bloomsbury, London. The air hung thick with the haze of pipe smoke and spilled ale. The wooden beams overhead stained dark from decades of spilled secrets and raised glasses. You could hear the low murmur of conversation, punctuated by the clink of pint glasses and the occasional burst of laughter from a corner table where off-duty Tommies swapped tales of the Blitz. Flickering gas lamps cast wavering shadows across the worn oak bar, where the barkeep, a burly man named Tom, with a face like weathered granite, polished a glass with deliberate slowness, his eyes flicking toward the door every few seconds. Johann Keller nursed a half-pint of bitter in a booth at the back, his posture slouched to mimic the weary factory worker he'd become in his cover story. The wool of his borrowed jacket itched against his skin, and the faint scent of fish from his day's labor at the docks clung to him like an alibi. It had been 2 days since his transmission, 2 days of laying low in the Camden boarding house, rationing cigarettes and scanning the streets for tales. Sparrow was late, uncharacteristically so, but Keller trusted the network's protocols. No names in the open, no signals until the dead drop confirmed safety. He glanced at the clock above the bar. 8:42 p.m. The blackout outside pressed against the frosted windows like a velvet shroud. The ARP siren, a distant wail from some drill in the East End. Keller's fingers drummed idly on the scarred tabletop, tracing the initials carved there by long-gone patrons. In his mind, he replayed the envelope's contents, frequencies for secure bursts, contact protocols for the other 4 agents. Codename Hawk in Birmingham, Dove in Manchester, Eagle in Liverpool, and Falcon back in the Midlands. Trout would bind them, funneling reports on RAF sorties, shipyard welders' shifts, the endless churn of Britain's war economy. One solid transmission chain, and Berlin would have eyes everywhere. The door creaked open, letting in a gust of chill autumn air, laced with the metallic tang of rain on cobblestones. A woman entered, unremarkable at first glance. Mid-30s, mousy brown hair pinned under a cloche hat, a threadbare coat buttoned to the chin. She scanned the room with feigned casualness, then made for the bar, ordering a gin and tonic in a soft Midlands accent. Sparrow, real name, Eliza Thorne, a former actress turned Abwehr asset, recruited during a Berlin tour in '39. Her cover was impeccable, a typist at the War Office periphery, close enough to overhear whispers without raising flags. Keller waited the obligatory 5 minutes, then rose, weaving through the crowd to accidentally brush her arm as he reached for a forgotten scarf on a hook. "Pardon, miss," he muttered, slipping the folded note into her pocket, a rendezvous confirmation for the morrow, codes to relay to the others. She nodded imperceptibly, her eyes meeting his for a split second, green and sharp as broken glass. Back in his booth, Keller felt the knot in his chest loosen. The network stirred, but as Eliza slipped out into the night, hailing a bus toward her flat in Islington, she didn't notice the figure in the alley across the street. A nondescript man in a Macintosh, collar turned up against the drizzle. Detective Sergeant Harold Wilkins, MI5's eyes and ears in the shadows, jotted the pub's address in his notebook, the pencil lead smudging in the damp. He'd been tailing her for weeks, ever since a double agent's tip linked her to anomalous radio spikes. Tonight's brush with the stranger, that was the thread they'd pull. Across town, in the bowels of MI5's Curzon Street lair, Captain Geoffrey Lang paced the operations room, the floorboards creaking under his polished brogues. The space was a warren of filing cabinets and maps pinned with red flags, illuminated by the harsh glare of desk lamps that banished the blackout's gloom. Felicity Hart hunched over her Enigma emulator, a jury-rigged beast of wires and relays salvaged from captured gear, her glasses slipping down her nose as she cross-referenced the Camden burst. "Confirmed, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the late hour. "The signal originated from a Valiant shortwave set, standard Abwehr issue. And this," she tapped the intercept log, "matches a pattern from Ostend traffic, insertion via Margate, likely E-boat support." Lang halted, rubbing his chin, the stubble rasping like sandpaper. A veteran of the First War, with a limp from Ypres that flared in the damp, he knew the stakes. "Trout, it's their sleeper op. If we bag the courier tonight, we can turn the whole net." He glanced at the wall clock. 9:15 p.m. "Alert the watch on Thorne. And pull the file on potential contacts. Bloomsbury pubs, rail hubs. No arrests yet. We watch. We wait." By midnight, the net tightened. Keller, back in his room, unpacked the radio once more, tuning to a secondary frequency for Eliza's acknowledgement. The set hummed to life, the Morse key cool under his fingers. Sparrow contacted. "Proceed phase 2. He sent it blind. No reply expected until dawn. The transmission crackled out, faint but clear, swallowed by the city's electromagnetic fog. Unseen, a receiver in a nondescript van parked 2 blocks away snatched it mid-air. Wilkins, now relieved by a team from Special Branch, relayed the coordinates to Curzon Street via field telephone, the line crackling with static. "Target active. Camden 3rd floor, Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house." Lang leaned over the map, his finger stabbing the pinpoint. "Double the surveillance. If he moves, we shadow. Thorne's our lever. Bring her in quietly at first light. He straightened, the weight of command etching lines deeper into his face. The Abwehr thought they were ghosts, but MI5 was the Reaper, sickle honed by Bletchley's blades. Dawn broke grey and sodden on the 15th, fog rolling off the Thames like smoke from a dying fire. Eliza Thorne stirred in her narrow bed, the codes burning a hole in her bedside drawer. She dressed hurriedly, stockings laddered from yesterday's haste, a blouse with a missing button, and slipped out for the dead drop, a hollowed Bible in a churchyard near St. Paul's. The air bit cold, carrying the scent of wet leaves and distant bakery ovens firing up despite rationing. She didn't hear the soft footfalls behind her or see the plainclothes officer melting into the queue at a corner tea shop. Keller, meanwhile, ventured out for provisions, his suitcase radio stashed under loose floorboards. The streets bustled with wartime normalcy, milkmen on bicycles rattling bottles, children in gas masks practicing drills at school gates. He bought a loaf and cheese from a corner shop, the shopkeeper, a one-armed vet, grumbling about shortages. "Bloody Jerry's, eh? Starving us out." "Aye," Keller replied in his practiced Dutch lilt, forcing a chuckle. But as he turned the corner, a prickle ran up his spine. A newsstand vendor lingered too long, eyes on his face. Paranoia? Or the first crack? By noon, the threads converged. Eliza reached the churchyard, the Bible waiting in its niche, her hand trembling as she exchanged the note for the envelope inside. Codes for Hawk, the Birmingham link. But as she pocketed it, a gloved hand clamped her shoulder. "Miss Thorne, a word, if you please." She spun, face paling, to find Wilkins and two burly constables. "What's this about?" she stammered, but her accent slipped, the Midlands veneer cracking. "Ministry business," Wilkins said flatly, steering her toward a waiting Austin. No struggle. She knew the drill. Resistance meant the noose. Word raced to Curzon Street. Lang's team poured over her flat, unearthing the radio, diaries scrawled with Abwehr ciphers. "It's all here," Hart exclaimed, piecing together the network from scraps. "Trout's the hub. 5 agents coordinated from London." Lang nodded grimly. "Feed her disinformation, make her sing the names." By evening, under the dim bulb of an interrogation room, Eliza broke, not with torture, but promises of leniency, her actress's poise crumbling like wet paper. The courier, "Johann, he's Trout. Codes came last night, Bloomsbury." Keller, oblivious, tuned his set that dusk, awaiting Phase 2's echo. The signal came, not from Berlin, but a ghost trace, MI5's forgery luring him deeper. He smiled, packing for the train to Birmingham. The trap yawned wider, jaws slick with inevitability. In Curzon Street, Lang lit a cigarette, exhaling smoke that curled like the noose tightening. "Tonight," he told his team, "we close it." The network, so carefully spun, frayed on the edge of one woman's slip, and Keller's unwitting hand. October 15th, 1941. The soot-streaked platform at Euston Station, London. Steam hissed from the locomotive's vents, like the breath of a dragon rousing from slumber, mingling with the acrid bite of coal smoke that stung your eyes and coated your throat. The afternoon crowd surged around you, commuters in threadbare overcoats, soldiers on leave with kit bags slung over shoulders, their boots thudding against the oil-slicked concrete. Overhead, the iron girders of the Victorian roof groaned faintly under the weight of sandbags piled high against bomb blasts, while a loudspeaker crackled with announcements. "Mind the gap. Next train to Birmingham. Platform 3. Johann Keller blended into the throng, his valise gripped tightly in one hand, the other buried in his coat pocket around the forged identity card that marked him as Jan van der Meer, Dutch exile and lathe operator seeking work in the Midlands factories. The forged signal from Sparrow still echoed in his mind, a crisp Morse affirmation of Phase 2, urging him north to activate Hawk. He boarded the second-class carriage, claiming a window seat amid the rattle of doors slamming and the shuffle of feet. The train lurched forward, wheels screeching on the rails, pulling him away from the capital's watchful eyes toward the industrial heartland, where smoke-belching chimneys scarred the horizon like wounds. You can feel the vibration thrumming through the wooden benches, the sway as the countryside unfolds in blurred greens and browns, punctuated by the skeletal frames of half-built defenses, tank traps, pillboxes etched with fresh concrete. Keller unfolded a newspaper, the Daily Mirror's bold headlines screaming of U-boat sinkings and RAF triumphs, but his eyes skimmed without reading, mind fixed on the dead drop coordinates scribbled in invisible ink on a slip of paper. Hawk, real name Peter Voss, no relation to the Hauptmann but a fellow Fleming recruited in Antwerp, was embedded as a toolmaker in a Coventry machine shop, his wireless hidden in a false-bottom toolbox. The codes would link him to the chain, reports on Spitfire production rates, convoy loadings at the docks. One accidental word, one loose lip, and the Führer's grand design could illuminate British vulnerabilities. By dusk, the train ground into New Street Station, Birmingham's belly, where the air thickened with the metallic tang of forges and the ceaseless hammer of rivets from nearby war plants. Gas lamps flickered to life along the platforms, casting elongated shadows that danced like spectres. Keller shouldered his bag and melted into the evening rush. Workers streaming toward pubs and homes, their faces gaunt from rationed meals, voices laced with the flat, brummy burr. He caught a tram to the outskirts, the conductor punching his ticket with numb fingers, oblivious to the predator in passengers' clothing. The rendezvous was a dingy cafe off Corporation Street, its windows taped against shattering glass, the interior lit by a single bare bulb that buzzed like an angry hornet. Keller arrived at 7:30 p.m., ordering a cup of ersatz tea that tasted of boiled acorns, his eyes scanning the room over the chipped rim. The place reeked of fried onions and stale sweat. A handful of locals hunched over dominoes in the corner, their murmurs a low drone. Hawk was punctual, slipping in 5 minutes later. A stocky man in grease-stained overalls, his face smudged with what looked like machine oil but was likely camouflage for the day's labors. Codename earned from his sharp gaze, like a bird of prey spotting prey from afar. They sat at a corner table, backs to the wall, the obligatory exchange of phrases masking the handoff. "Fine weather for the races," Keller said in his accented English, sliding the envelope under a saucer as Voss nodded, replying, "Aye, but the favourites always disappoint." Inside were the frequencies, activation codes, and a list of emergency cutouts, names inked faintly, to be memorized and burned. Voss pocketed it with a sleight born of practice, his calloused fingers brushing Keller's in a grip that conveyed solidarity. "The shop's buzzing," he whispered, leaning in close enough for Keller to smell the machine oil on his breath. "New Merlin engines rolling out, hundreds a month. Berlin will feast on it." Keller nodded, suppressing a surge of triumph. The network pulsed stronger now, veins carrying secrets southward. But as Voss rose to leave, promising a test transmission by midnight, he paused at the door, turning back with a furrowed brow. "One thing, Jan. That pub meet in London. Sparrow mentioned a tale. Paranoia or—" Keller waved it off, forcing a grin. "Nerves. The city's crawling with coppers, but we're ghosts." Voss hesitated, then vanished into the night, the door swinging shut behind him with a jangle of bells. Alone, Keller lingered over his tea, the liquid gone cold, a nagging doubt flickering like the bulb overhead. He paid and stepped out into the blackout, the street swallowed by darkness save for the faint glow of torch beams from patrolling wardens. The air nipped at his ears, carrying distant factory whistles and the low growl of a lorry rumbling past. Unseen, across the road in a shadowed doorway, Constable Evelyn Price, MI5's northern operative, a former WAF with a knack for blending into crowds, scribbled furiously in her notebook. She'd tailed Keller from the station, her sturdy Oxford silent on the pavement, heart pounding with the thrill of the hunt. The Bloomsbury bust had rippled outward. Eliza Thorne's confession under Lang's relentless questioning had spilled the Birmingham link hours after her arrest. "Hawke, toolmaker Voss," she'd sobbed, trading names for a slim hope of clemency. Price's radio crackled in her coat pocket, a whisper from Curzon Street. "Confirm contact, no move yet. Shadow to the safe house." Keller trudged toward his temporary digs, a rented room above a tobacconist's in Digbeth, the cobbles slick underfoot from an earlier drizzle. The shop's sign creaked in the wind, promising Imperial Tobacco, rationed but reliable. He climbed the narrow stairs, the banister sticky with grime, and bolted the door behind him. Unpacking his Valiant set onto the rickety table, he tuned to the acknowledgement frequency, fingers hovering over the key. The room smelled of musty linens and pipe ash from the floor below, the blackout curtain drawn tight against prying eyes. Midnight came with a tolling clock from some distant spire. Keller tapped out the query. "Hawke received? Phase 2 green." The signal arced into the void, a fragile thread. Reply came swift, Voss's set, from a shed behind his terrace house 2 miles away. "Affirmative. Transmitting test burst Berlin." Satisfaction bloomed in Keller's chest. He extinguished the set, collapsing onto the lumpy bed, the springs protesting under his weight. But Voss, in his dimly lit outbuilding, fumbled the procedure. Exhausted from a 12-hour shift, his mind muddled by the day's revelations, he miscoded the final sequence, a simple transposition meant to be trout secure, but garbled into something perilously close to the emergency distress call. Worse, in his haste to conceal the set, he left a scrap of the envelope's wrapping in the bin outside, the ink smudged but legible. Abwehr, London Freck 142.7. Price, circling the block in a borrowed Morris Minor, spotted the flicker of Voss's window light, too late to intervene, but early enough to note the address. She radioed it back, voice hushed over the static. "Target 2 confirmed. Possible slip. Check bins." By 1 a.m., a special branch team swarmed Voss's street, gloved hands rifling the rubbish. The scrap was theirs, the frequency a smoking gun linking back to the Camden burst. In Curzon Street, Captain Lang slammed his fist on the desk, the map trembling. Felicity Hart cross-referenced the garble. "It's Trout's chain, sir." The accidental code flip. "It's broadcasting their positions like a beacon." Lang's eyes gleamed in the lamplight. "Overnight. We roll at dawn. Keller first. He's the head." Keller slept fitfully, dreams fractured by shadows that whispered of unraveling threads. The network, so meticulously woven, snagged on Voss's weary mistake. A German hand betraying its own, the trap's jaws now inches from snapping shut. Dawn crept in, grey and unforgiving, as vans idled in the Birmingham fog, engines purring like predators on the prowl. October 16th, 1941. The fog-choked streets of Digbeth, Birmingham. Dawn clawed its way through the industrial haze, a pallid light filtering past the blackout curtains to paint the cramped room in ghostly greys. You could hear the first stirrings of the city awakening, the distant clang of factory gates opening, the sputter of delivery lorries firing to life, their exhaust mingling with the damp chill that seeped through the floorboards like an unwelcome guest. Johann Keller stirred on the lumpy bed, the coarse sheets twisted around his legs, his sleep fractured by half-remembered dreams of unraveling wires and closing doors. The air in the room hung heavy with the stale residue of yesterday's tea and the faint, oily tang from the Valiant radio still concealed beneath the table. Keller's eyes snapped open at the muffled thud from the street below. A heavy vehicle idling, then doors slamming like punctuation marks in the quiet. He sat up, heart quickening, the wooden frame creaking under his weight. Paranoia, he told himself, rubbing the stubble on his jaw, but the unease from Voss's question lingered like a bad aftertaste. He swung his legs over the side, bare feet meeting the cold linoleum, and reached for his trousers draped over a chair. The pocket held the forged papers, the slip with Hawk's coordinates, safeguards in a world of shadows. He dressed swiftly, buttoning his shirt with fingers that trembled just slightly, then knelt to check the radio's hiding spot. Secure, the set's dials glinting dully in the half-light. A sharper noise cut through the fog, footsteps on the stairs outside, deliberate and multiple, the treads groaning under the weight of more than one man. Keller froze, breath shallow, as a fist hammered the door. 3 sharp raps that echoed like gunshots in the narrow hall. "Open up! Police!" The voice was authoritative, laced with the Midlands clip, but something in its tone sent ice through his veins. He scanned the room wildly. Window to the alley below, a 3-story drop onto cobblestones, the door, flimsy pine that wouldn't hold against a charge. His hand darted to the table drawer, fumbling for the Luger stashed there, but it caught on a loose hinge, seconds ticking like a fuse. The door splintered inward with a crash, shards of wood flying as 2 burly constables in steel helmets burst through, torches slicing the gloom like blades. "Hands up on the floor!" one bellowed, his Webley revolver leveled, the barrel a Blackmore in the beam. Keller raised his arms, the pistol slipping from his grasp to clatter on the floor, his mind racing through protocols, deny, deflect, demand counsel. But behind them loomed a sharper figure, Detective Inspector Reginald Hale, MI5's field lead for the Midlands sweep, his trench coat damp from the mist, eyes cold as flint under the brim of his fedora. "Johann Keller, or should I say Jan van der Meer, you're a long way from Rotterdam." They cuffed him roughly, the steel biting into his wrists, and hauled him down the stairs past the wide-eyed tobacconist, who clutched his apron like a shield. Outside, the fog swirled around 3 unmarked vans, their engines rumbling low, headlights dimmed to slits. Keller's valise was rifled on the pavement, the radio extracted with clinical efficiency by a bespectacled technician who whistled softly at its Abwehr markings. "Valiant Mark III," he murmured to Hale, "fresh from Hamburg." Keller said nothing, his jaw set, but inside, the pieces tumbled. Sparrow's tail, Voss's hesitation, the network compromised. His arrival, the spark that lit the fuse. Across town, in the terraced rows of Small Heath, Peter Voss faced his own reckoning. The accidental garble from his midnight transmission had been the beacon. By 5:45 a.m., as the first shift workers trudged to the Austin plant, a knock echoed at his door, polite at first, then insistent. Voss, bleary-eyed and nursing a mug of camp coffee in his kitchen, the wireless still warm in the shed out back, cracked the door to find Constable Evelyn Price, her warrant card flashing in the gloom. "Ministry of Defence inspection, Mr. Voss. Routine check on blackout compliance." He blinked, the grease from his overalls transferring to the doorframe, but suspicion flickered in his eyes. "At this hour? Show me the papers." Price's smile was thin as she stepped inside, 2 plainclothes men flanking her, their presence filling the narrow hall like smoke. The flat smelled of boiled cabbage and machine oil, the table cluttered with blueprints that screamed war work. Voss's hand twitched toward a drawer, but Price was faster, her voice dropping to steel. "We know about the shed, Peter. The codes, the burst to Berlin. Trout ends here." They dragged him out as neighbors peeked through curtains, the shed yielding its secrets in minutes, the valiant set, scraps of paper with frequencies scrawled in haste. Voss struggled briefly, his stocky frame bucking against the cuffs, shouting in Flemish-accented English, "You don't understand, this is a mistake." But Price radioed Curzon Street with grim satisfaction. "Hawk secured, no shots fired, en route." By 7 a.m., the net contracted further. In Manchester, Dove, a wiry Irishman named Liam O'Rourke posing as a dock foreman, received a forged alert via dead drop, the ink still wet from MI5's forgery mill. Trout compromised, abort and exfil. Panic seized him in his bedsit overlooking the shipyards, the Mersey's briny scent wafting through the cracked window. He bolted the door, smashing his radio with a hammer, shards of bakelite scattering like teeth. But the watchers were already there, a van blocking the alley, and when he slipped out the fire escape, Hale's team, dispatched overnight by rail, netted him mid-stride, his protests drowned by the morning foghorns. Liverpool's Eagle fell next, roused from a pub cellar safehouse by a tip from the Birmingham Hall. Real name Karl Heinrich, a defrocked engineer with a limp from Dunkirk. He tuned his set for the daily check-in, only to hear the crackle of interference, a jammer from a nearby MI5 truck. Armed with Voss's confessed cutouts, the arrest was textbook. A dawn raid, door battered in. Heinrich dragged kicking from his bunk, his shouts echoing off the bombed-out warehouses. "Traitors! Who sold us?" But the silence from his comrades told the tale. Back in London, Curzon Street buzzed like a hive breached. Captain Geoffrey Lang stood over the operations table, the map now a spiderweb of red pins marking the fallen. Camden, Bloomsbury, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool. Felicity Hart typed furiously, collating confessions. Thorne's initial spill, Voss's breakdown under sodium pentothal light questioning, the others crumbling like dominoes. "The accidental code from Hawke," she said, pushing up her glasses. "It lit them up like Christmas. Keller's the linchpin. Without him, Trout was blind." Keller, meanwhile, bounced in the back of a Black Maria toward a holding cell in Warwickshire, the cuffs chafing his wrists raw. The van's interior reeked of vomit and despair, the engine's drone a monotonous dirge. He pieced it together in the jolting darkness. The garbled signal, Voss's slip, his own hand, unwittingly, delivering the noose through that envelope. Betrayal not by intent, but exhaustion. A human frailty in the machine of espionage. As the vehicle turned onto a rutted lane, gravel crunching under tires, he felt the weight of the Reich's gaze fading, replaced by the cold certainty of the noose, or worse, the turncoat's cell. Lang lit another cigarette in the ops room, smoke wreathing his face as a runner burst in. "All 5 secured, sir. Network rolled up by noon." He exhaled slowly, the trap closed overnight, the Abwehr's grand insertion reduced to ink on dossiers. But Keller's interrogation loomed, the final thread to pull, secrets yet to spill. The fog lifted outside, revealing a city unbowed, its secrets safer for one accidental betrayal. October 17th, 1941. A windowless interrogation room deep in the bowels of Wormwood Scrubbs prison, London. The air clung thick and stagnant, laced with the sour reek of sweat-soaked wool and the faint metallic tang of fear that seemed to seep from the very walls. You could feel the chill radiating from the bare concrete floor, seeping up through your soles like icy fingers, while a single overhead bulb swung lazily on its cord, casting jittery shadows that danced across the scarred wooden table like mocking spectres. The room's only furnishings, a rickety chair bolted to the floor, a straight-backed one for the Inquisitor, and the table scarred by years of desperate fingernails, amplified every creak and sigh, turning the space into a pressure cooker of isolation. Johann Keller sat slumped in the bolted chair, his wrists chafed raw from the handcuffs now removed, but replaced by the invisible bonds of exhaustion. His face, once sharp and alert, had hollowed overnight, stubble shadowing his jaw like a bruise, eyes bloodshot from the relentless glare and the sodium-laced tea they'd forced down him hours ago. The woolen suit, rumpled from the van ride and the initial frisking, hung loose on his frame, the faint fishy odor from his cover clinging stubbornly. He hadn't spoken since the arrest, lips pressed thin, but inside his mind churned like the channel swells. A torrent of recriminations for Voss's blunder, for trusting the forged signals, for that damned envelope that had woven his noose. The door swung open with a hydraulic hiss, admitting Captain Geoffrey Lang, his brogues clicking sharply against the concrete, a manila folder tucked under one arm. Lang was the picture of controlled menace, mid-40s, lean as a blade, with a neatly trimmed moustache that did little to soften the predatory glint in his eyes. He carried the faint scent of pipe tobacco and carbolic soap, a reminder of the civilized world above. Behind him trailed Felicity Hart, her sensible pumps softer on the floor, notebook in hand, glasses perched on her nose like a scholar's shield. She sat up at the table's edge, her presence a subtle psychological prod, the analyst, piecing souls as easily as ciphers. Lang slid into the chair opposite, the wood groaning under him, and flipped open the folder with deliberate slowness. Pages rustled. Intercepts, maps, Voss's signed confessions scrawled in shaky script. Morning, Herr Keller, or shall we stick with Jan van der Meer? Though I suspect even your Dutch is as phony as that lathe operator story. His voice was even, almost conversational, but laced with the Midlands edge that spoke of streets he'd walked before the war. Keller met his gaze, unblinking, the silence stretching taut as a bowstring. Hart cleared her throat softly, her pen scratching initial notes. We have your radio, the Valiant. Serial number matches Hamburg shipments from last month, and the codes, beautifully forged, but sloppy on the margins. Abwehr's getting careless. She slid a photograph across the table. Voss, handcuffed and dishevelled, being led from his shed, the incriminating scrap of paper held aloft like a trophy. Keller's jaw tightened, a flicker of betrayal crossing his features before he schooled it blank. Lang leaned forward, elbows on the table, the bulb's light carving hollows under his eyes. Your friend Peter, Hawk, was it? He talked. All night. The garbled code. Not sabotage, just a tired man's slip. But it lit you up like a flare. Thorn, too. Eliza's singing about Bloomsbury, the pub brush, every dead drop from here to Liverpool. He tapped the photo. Eagles already en route from the docks, cursing your name. Dove smashed his set, but we had the address from Voss. The network's gutted, Keller. Trout drowned before it swam. Keller's fingers twitched on the armrests, knuckles whitening. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in with the weight of his isolation. No Berlin rescue, no extraction team slinking through the fog. He could almost taste the salt from Ostend Pier again, hear the E-boat's diesels fading into the mist. You think this ends me? He rasped finally, his accent slipping, fully German now, gravelly from disuse. The Reich has eyes everywhere. You'll choke on your victories. Lang's smile was thin, predatory. Eyes? We've got ears too. Bletchley's been peeling your traffic like an onion for months. But you're the gift that keeps giving. Tell us about the backups, the sleepers in Scotland, the cutouts in Wales. Or do we start with the families? Your handler in Ostend, perhaps. Eric Voss, Hauptmann, scarred cheek, easy to reach with the right channels. Hart interjected smoothly, her voice a counterpoint of calm reason. It's over, Johann. No trial, no headlines, just a quiet cell or cooperation. Help us feed them disinformation, and maybe you see the other side of the wire. She pushed another item across. A cigarette, unlit, a small mercy. Keller stared at it, the temptation coiling in his gut like smoke. The interrogation stretched, the bulbs swing, marking time in erratic arcs. Lang circled like a shark, probing with details gleaned from the night's haul. The frequencies from the envelope, the Birmingham Cafe's saucer handoff, even the Gauloise's stubs in the tobacconist's bin, traced to Belgian imports. Keller resisted at first, spitting denials in clipped bursts, but the drip of evidence wore him down. By noon, as the faint rumble of a lunch trolley echoed from the corridor, he cracked, not with a flood, but a trickle. Falcon, Midlands, but he's clean, no radio yet. Coordinates in my head only. Lang nodded to Hart, who scribbled furiously, her pen a lifeline to the broader net. Good start. Now the Ostend route, E-boats, timings, every insertion since summer. Keller's shoulders sagged, the fight leaching out like air from a punctured tire. He recited in monotone, routes, codes, names of compromised contacts across the channel. Each word felt like surrender, the accidental betrayal of Voss's code now amplified by his own unraveling. Outside in the prison yard, the fog had burned off, revealing a weak sun glinting off barbed wire. Special branch vans ferried the detainees south, Voss to a holding cell in Paddington Green, Thorne to a women's facility in Holloway, her actress's poise shattered into sobs. O'Rourke and Heinrich, bundled like contraband, spat curses at their escorts, but the fight was hollow. MI5's overnight sweep had cauterized the wound before infection spread. Back in Curzon Street by mid-afternoon, Lang briefed his superiors in a smoke-filled conference room, the map updated with fresh pins. Falcon's projected safe-house circled in red, a dawn raid planned. "Keller's spilling," he said, stubbing out his pipe. "The slip chained them all. One code error, and the house of cards folds." Hart nodded, stacking dossiers, her mind already on the forgeries they'd plant. Phantom reports of phantom fleets, luring Abwehr deeper into the illusion. Keller, transferred to a solitary cell by evening, lay on the thin bunk, the cot's springs digging into his back like accusations. The prison hummed around him, clanging gates, distant shouts in English accents. A symphony of defeat. He'd betrayed them not by choice, but by the chain of errors, his delivery, Voss's fatigue, the relentless British machine. As night fell, blackout sirens wailing faintly, he wondered if Berlin even knew Trout had sunk, or if the war's vast shadow had already swallowed the news. In the ops room, Lang poured a victory scotch, the amber liquid catching the lamplight. One more thread, Falcon, and the trap would seal utterly. The accidental hand that doomed the network now served the Allies, secrets flowing one way into the fog of war. October 18th, 1941. A rain-lashed farmhouse on the outskirts of Coventry, England. The night pressed down like a sodden blanket, the downpour drumming relentlessly on the slate roof, each drop a staccato hammer against the warped shingles. You could smell the earthy rot of soaked soil seeping through the cracks in the floorboards, mingling with the faint, acrid bite of gun oil from the hidden arsenal beneath the stairs. Wind howled through the eaves, rattling the blackout shutters, while inside, the single oil lamp flickered on a scarred oak table, casting long, wavering shadows that twisted like fingers across the whitewashed walls. The air hung heavy, laced with the musty scent of hay from the adjoining barn, where livestock lowed uneasily in the storm. Oscar Lehmann, codename Falcon, paced the cramped kitchen, his boots leaving muddy prints on the flagstones, the hem of his trousers sodden from a midnight check on the perimeter. A burly ex-soldier from the Rhineland, broad-shouldered and scarred from bar fights in occupied France, he gripped a Mauser pistol loosely in one hand, the metal cool and reassuring against his palm. His cover as a German POW escaped and turned farmhand had held for months, the locals in this rural pocket accepting his broken English and the limp he feigned from a shell burst. But tonight, the forged alert from the network, delivered via a milk bottle dead drop that afternoon, gnawed at him like a rat in the walls. Trout compromised. Immediate activation. Codes enclosed. No signature, just the urgent scrawl, urging him to transmit a burst to Berlin confirming his readiness. Lehmann paused by the window, peering through a slit in the curtain, the rain-smeared glass distorting the hedgerows into monstrous shapes. The wireless set squatted on the table like a mechanical toad, a compact Telefunken model, its antenna coiled in the rafters, disguised as a gramophone when the vicar's wife dropped by with eggs. He unfolded the slip from the bottle, the ink running slightly in the damp, frequencies matching the ones he'd memorized from prior briefs, a call to link with the chain. Doubt flickered. Why no personal cutout from Keller? But loyalty overrode it. He flipped the power switch, the tubes humming to life with a low buzz that vibrated through the wood. Fingers danced over the Morse key, the dots and dashes spilling out into the ether. Falcon active. Trout codes received. Awaiting orders. Ooh. He leaned back, exhaling a plume of smoke from his last German cigarette, the tobacco sharp and forbidden amid the English rationed weeds. The storm masked the transmission's faint crackle, but in his mind it arced triumphantly across the channel, binding the remnants of the net. Little did he know the signal was a ghost, intercepted mid-air by a mobile Y-station van hunkered in a nearby spinney, its operators huddled over receivers, headphones clamped tight against the gale. 12 miles away, in the MI5 forward command post, a requisitioned vicarage on the city's edge, Captain Jeffrey Lang hunched over a field radio, the static-laced voice from the intercept team cutting through the room's tension like a knife. Rain pelted the leaded windows, blurring the view of sodden fields, while the space reeked of wet wool from the team's Macintoshes draped over chairs and the bitter steam of boiled tea from a Primus stove. Felicity Hart sat beside him, her notebook open on a trestle table strewn with maps and cigarette butts, her pencil hovering as the coordinates locked in. Grid reference confirmed, sir. 2 miles east of the old mill. Single source, Telefunken signature. Lang straightened, his trench coat buttoned against the draft, snaking through the door, the mustache twitching as he barked orders into the handset. Mobile units converge on the farmhouse. No lights, no sirens. Flank from the north. Hale leads the assault. Price on overwatch. He hung up, turning to Hart with a nod that carried the weight of the night's culmination. Keller's spill gave us the location. Red Barn, Coventry Fringe. The last thread. If Falcon bites on the disinformation we fed through the forgery, he seals his own cage. The convoy slipped out into the deluge. 3 Bedford trucks, wipers slapping rhythmically, headlights masked to slits that pierced the murk like wary eyes. Detective Inspector Reginald Hale rode in the lead vehicle, his Webley holstered at his hip, the cab filled with the low mutter of his team. 6 special branch men in plain clothes, Sten guns oiled and ready, faces set grim under steel helmets. The road devolved into rutted lanes, mud sucking at the tires, the engine's growl barely audible over the torrent. Hale checked his watch, 11:47 p.m. The trap, sprung from Voss's accidental garble 2 nights prior, had rippled outward like a stone in a pond. Thorne's confession, Keller's breakdown, the chain arrests in Manchester and Liverpool. Now, Falcon, the sleeper meant to burrow deepest, would cap the sweep. They crested a rise, the farmhouse materializing as a hulking silhouette against the storm-tossed sky, its chimney puffing faint smoke from the kitchen stove. Hale signaled a halt in the tree line, the truck's engines cut to silence, rain hissing on the bonnets. 2 teams, front and rear. Breach on my mark. His men fanned out, boots squelching in the mire, shadows merging with the hedgerows. Price, positioned on a low hill with binoculars, whispered into her walkie-talkie. Target window lit. Movement inside. Lone figure. Inside, Lehman extinguished the set, stowing it in a floor safe with practiced haste, the combination clicking like fate's tumblers. He holstered the Mauser, pouring a tin mug of ersatz coffee, the bitter sludge steaming in the lamplight. A crack of thunder masked the first creak from the porch, the subtle give of a loose board under Hale's weight. Lehman spun, pistol whipping up, but the door exploded inward with a shotgun blast from the hinge, wood shards flying like shrapnel. "Down! Police!" Hale roared, diving through the breach, his torch beam pinning Lehman against the wall. The German fired wild, the shot splintering a chair, acrid powder smoke blooming in the air. But the team swarmed, 2 constables tackling him to the flagstones, knees grinding into his back, the Mauser skittering across the floor. Lehmann bucked, cursing in guttural German, "Schweinehunde!" but a baton cracked against his skull, stars bursting behind his eyes. They cuffed him swiftly, the steel ratcheting tight, as Hale's men tore the room apart. Floorboards pried, the safe yielding the Telefunken, scraps of code paper fluttering like defeated flags. "Clean takedown," Hale radioed, wiping rain from his brow as they bundled Lehman into the truck, his struggles muffled by a gag. "Set's warm. Transmission just sent. He's the last." Price confirmed from Overwatch, her voice crackling. "No runners. Perimeter secure." By 2 a.m., back at the vicarage, Lang poured over the hall with Hart, the rain easing to a patter. Lehman's pockets yielded a coded ledger, Backup contacts in Wales, dormant since summer, now fodder for disinformation streams to Berlin. The accidental flip from Voss, Lang murmured, tracing the map's final red pin. It chained them all. Keller's delivery was the bait. One weary code error, and MI5 reeled in the net overnight. Dawn broke pallid over the Midlands, the storm spent, leaving puddles that mirrored the grey sky. In Wormwood Scrubs, Keller lay in his cell, the confession's aftertaste bitter as he heard the distant clamour of the new arrival, Falcon snarling at his escorts. The network, birthed in Ostend's fog, drowned in its own frailty. Not grand betrayal, but a human slip, amplified by British vigilance. Lang, en route to London, lit a pipe in the rattling staff car, the smoke curling toward the horizon. Trout was gutted, Abwehr's eyes blinded in Britain's heartland. The war churned on, but for one night, the shadows had tilted allied, the trap sealed by accident's unforgiving hand.